And for more about that, we're joined here in the Beijing studio by Dr. Mirko Wormuth, who is the CEO of Twice Fashion Accessories. We also have Jennifer Hsiung, my co-worker, CGTN, host for Culture Express. That's a wonderful program you're hosting, by the way. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
And also in Southampton, Mike Bastian, the course leader of the Masters in Fashion Marketing and Branding at Winchester School of Art. Welcome to the three of you. First of all, I want to ask whether there's something called China design. Is China design for the Chinese market, for the Chinese, or actually there is a Chinese design for everybody? Mr. Wormuth, you want to go first?
Tian Wei, thanks for having me on the show.
Sure.
My first answer would be, I hope there's no China design. Why am I saying this? Because I think we're looking at a global market. And if there's a design that is too Chinese, I think that would be way too restricting for a brand and the market appeal that they might try to go for. So my answer would be, hopefully not.
All right, Jennifer, is that what your answer would also be?
I tend to agree, but maybe slightly different. I think
very diplomatic way of expressing that she is disagreeing with you.
Right?
Okay.
No. I think I have a variation, so to speak. I think there is something called China design, and that's homegrown Chinese designers now stepping into the forefront, both at home and abroad.
Right.
But I think labeling it as something that's specifically China design is very typecasting, and we fall into stereotypes and something that outsiders might perceive as, oh, we're putting things in a box. And I think right now, when you look at international designers or some brands using Chinese motifs in their designs, it might be a bit superficial or lip service. Like we'll have, oh, we know China is associated with red, with lanterns, with phoenixes and dragons, but it's so much more than that.
Yes, indeed. Professor Bastian, I'm sure you have your own way of understanding. And on the one hand, you do have Chinese designers, whether it's interior design or fashion, couture, many of these areas, Chinese. But at the same time, you also have brands coming from China that you will never be able to tell whether they're Chinese or not. They're just for international markets. What do you make of the potential of these two different directions?
春节好.
春节好.
I think it's that time of year. 春节好. I think my take on this is that you're talking about China design. Part of my research is to look at the influence of China or Chinese-related design in fashion internationally, and I think there's growing interest in that across European markets, across the Americas as well. So I think there is increasing demand for fashion garments across the fashion spectrum that have some aspect of Chinese history, Chinese culture, some Chineseness. So now that will develop and that will probably fragment, but I think what Chinese designers are realizing now that they can take a Chinese-related fashion garment overseas, and I think this trend will grow.
Well, you're looking at Rihanna just now, some of the footages that she wore during the Met Gala. Of course, that was quite a controversial piece. A great friend, Guo Pei, has been the designer of that specific piece. So that is also an interesting question leading us. That is, what about a brand? Or what about the design? Should you attract the eyeball first, and that is already a great success? Or should you make sure that the styles and the elements of your design is 100% being illustrated in those pieces? I think those two sometimes coincide, sometimes they're very different issues. Jennifer.
Right, so I think when looking at a brand, I mean, it falls under so many different levels. You have high-end luxury brands, and then you have affordable day-to-day brands like Zara, H&M. But I think for a Chinese designer wanting to make a splash in the international arena, you need to focus. I think there's this trend on focusing on differentiation, making it unique, but also quality and brand image. And doing that is kind of difficult to navigate when there's so many talented designers and such a large pool out there.
Yes, indeed. The Mirko, therefore, what is the way? I mean, for Guo Pei, I understand her very well because she really just wants to make a splash over there, make a statement, that's it. it does not represent the highest level of her design. That's just a statement. But on the other hand, people got to know her. And yet people say, well, I may not necessarily like her design, or I really fall in love with it. You know, just be bold. Is bold the way for the Chinese design?
I think it's a good question. I think it's awesome to have what she had. But let's be realistic.
What do you mean by awesome to have what she had?
I mean, that kind of publicity, those kind of pictures, and having Rihanna wear your designs, that's really outstanding. But let's be realistic. For most of the designers, they won't have the budget. Then there was one thing that you need to have the relationship with the agents to really get those kind of celebrities to wear designs. And realistically, that's not going to happen for most of them. But I think every designer, if they can find their tribe, if they can find their niche and have those first 1,000 of fans that love them, that is the starting point for a great pathway.
What is the niche? I mean, what is the friends and fans that would be able to love them? Where does it come from? Is there some specific characteristics? We're coming back to our original question, isn't it? Should there be too much Chineseness? Or actually, should that be just design itself?
I think that the designer in the beginning until the very end has to stay true to herself or himself. And if it's great design, they will find their niche. They will find their target audience.
Right.
It might be one person, it might be 5, it might be 100. But that is where you identify your market. And that's where you take off from.
Well, take the Chinese First Lady, for example. She is a beautiful illustration of China fashion in a way. She is our ambassador almost of fashion whenever she goes, isn't it, Jennifer? I mean, she, from the very beginning, going abroad on state visit or being herself as the ambassador on HIV, AIDS, and health issues, she's there to make a statement. She's having very undertoned when it comes to the fashion design, and yet the little and delicate elements of Chinese is always there.
Yes, during her first 3 state visits, she already garnered so much media attention for the subtlety, but also the breaking down of stereotypes. And then you have her, you know, coming on the scene, very chic, very modern, with subtle hints of Chinese design.
Absolutely.
Yes, and so for that chicness and how she carried it all, it definitely grabbed a lot of attention. So.
Can that success, Professor Bastian, be able to get across to other Chinese designers who are trying to find their niche? Is that really the Chinese niche?
Well, I think so. I think Peng Li Yuan's contribution is quite significant. I think she's put Chinese fashion on the map. Obviously, she's very charismatic, she's very charming, and I think that feeds through to younger generations of Chinese fashion designer who probably taking confidence from that. But I think the point I'd like to make here, the others have talked about branding. Branding is all about association. It's not just about differentiation, being different. And where Chinese fashion designers have an advantage, and I think the younger generations will show this more and more, showcase this more and more, is association with their culture and their history. However, it may not be that strong, the Chineseness, but that hint of Chinese association, different times of periods in history, I think that's what the Chinese public and also the international public will value now with fashion. Fashion has to have some meaning, some association. It can't just be different and have a different shape, a different color. There has to be some association with history, and I think that's where fashion designers, Chinese fashion designers have a real advantage.
About history, you see not only Chinese designers, I mean those designers coming originally from China, but also international brand names that are trying to incorporate some of the Chinese elements. As Jennifer mentioned earlier, some of them tend to be, well, temporarily superficial, but others have been doing some quite good job in order to find the real essence of the Chineseness. Mirko, it's really not just about having a dragon.
Exactly.
It's really not just about having your hair tied up in the very ancient way. There's something there that would get across. Really, it's just about China. And nowhere else will be able to find it. What exactly is it, Mirko?
I think, you know, I've been the last couple of days, I've been on LinkedIn, that platform a lot, and I've seen many articles that kind of lambasted what Victoria's Secret did in the last show, and kind of comparing
All about
it.
dragon, but they did it in a different way.
Yeah, but most people thought it was almost a bit on the ridiculous side of things. But I think
It's good to watch, though. Yeah. We have to accept it.
I almost want to say that, but as a man, I think I should not have. But
ahead,
there you go. Thank you for
Hi,
that.
Canty.
But I think what I always like as a very good example, but that goes more into the area of craftsmanship, is the Shangxia example, how Hermes went about that. And I think this is amazing when you see what this brand has done, what kind of techniques they have unearthed, what kind of products they are showcasing that show the uniqueness and also the sort of the century-old craftsmanship. It's been an amazing journey to watch that brand.
When you are saying centuries-old craftsmanship, well, I have to ask Jennifer, because her parents originally coming from China. And maybe she's having a different judgment of what exactly is the Chinese element over there. Jennifer, do you agree with what Mirko just said? The Chineseness, what exactly is it to you?
Well, I think there's an essential element, and when I got to interview Mary Ma, who is basically China's, you know, it girl of the 90s, model turned fashion designer, during China Fashion Week in October last year,
Right.
she decided, now her designs are very neutral in design, clean cut, nothing that you look at and say, oh, that's very Chinese. But for this last year, she decided to incorporate elements of the E-ethnic group into her designs. And she was very wary about that, because she was like, are people going to think this is too Chinese, too ethnic? She didn't know what the balance was, but she spent, you know, countless visits in the village, researching their culture, the history of embroidery.
Talking to the women.
Right, that's passed down from generation to generation. And I think she had this epiphany when she realized that, you know, China's treasure is China's many ethnicities that the world still doesn't know about.
Right.
So I think that is where some of the niche might come from. But again, even though she's Chinese, it didn't mean she knew all this inherently. She still had to go there and do the legwork and the research. So in a way, it's fair game. If you're a Western designer, you can do that as well. It might not be as easy, but you have that access if you want to.
Sometimes discovering about yourself is even more difficult and challenging, isn't it? Professor Bastian, of course, I mean, this part of research the designers could do themselves, but when it comes to real branding and also going into the industry, that's another different issue. Professor Bastian, how sophisticated are Chinese designers these days? Whether it's couture, whether it's interior designs, whether it's architecture, how sophisticated are they internationally?
Well, I think they're becoming. I think that the real issue here is that these younger generations are far more self-confident, and they've had far more self-belief in their self-determination, and therefore they're making their presence known internationally. Obviously, we mentioned Guo Pei, and we have others that have been influenced, have China influence, Vera Wang, Jimmy Choo, Jason Wu, and this is a very, very different breed, and I don't really think they see a challenge at all. I think they just get on with what they're doing and do it very, very well. And I think we'll see more of this. So perhaps going back a few generations, there was a real barrier there and a real lack of belief. But that's changing. And again, they have this advantage of being able to incorporate China's association, and Western brands that do that often make a mess of it. So
is there really,
I think these.
Is there really a generational difference? Are the newer generations of designers really going to get us there? Mirko, do you agree?
You see, I'm what I would like to see more, to be quite honest, and that's the commercial side of fashion, of the design, because at the end of the day, they have to sell it. They have to make money. They have to be profitable. And what I haven't seen so much are the duos. And what do I mean by that? It's the designer and the commercial brain behind that designer. So I'm talking about Tom Ford and Domenico De Sola, or I'm talking about Philip Lim and Win Zhou.
Right.
Like, where are those combinations of brains and design strength that actually can capture the market and become sophisticated, not only on the design side, but also on the marketing and sales side?
Okay, can do both. Professor Bastian, do you think
that's
there are
an
a lot
excellent
of,
point. Yeah. I think that's an excellent point. It's something I've been writing about for a while. I think that's the next step. Whilst these younger Chinese fashion designers are very creative, very bold, very innovative, very talented, they perhaps lack that experience and knowledge in building a brand commercially. And that's where we need to see progress now. That's the next step forward, and they perhaps need support in that.
But Professor, don't we need to have a huge foundation of these young designers or not, trying their best in order to make a point, so that we would be able to harvest some of the biggest brand names that both of you have earlier mentioned? It takes them decades to come out, and it takes hundreds and even thousands of them to come out eventually with a few. Jennifer, don't you think?
Well, I think sometimes, unfortunately, it really is just timing and luck. If you look at a lot of the successful designers, Jason Wu, how did he become a household name? Michelle Obama wore 2 of his dresses to each of the inaugurations.
She just happens to like it.
Right, exactly. And then you have Guo Pei, okay, she was designing for almost 3 decades in China, but whoa, once Rihanna wore, her beautiful yellow gown at the 2015 Met Gala.
I would say uniquely beautiful yellow gown.
Very uniquely, and all of a sudden that, propelled her to the forefront. So there's this, we live in an age of the internet, shopping online and social media. We can't forget social media. In China, we have this thing called KOL, key opinion leaders, a lot of socialites, the Paris Hiltons of China, or internet celebrities that are making statements, everything on Sina Weibo, fashion statements, and people follow that, and that's how consumer spending is being driven these days.
This is exactly a great point. That is, China's market size big enough to absorb all of these young, rising fashion designers, but will that make them desire even more to become international? Do they need to become international to make a point? Or should they be just satisfying the domestic market? If you're talking about brands, if you're talking about making a profit, they can well do it at home. Everybody wants to come here to make a few bucks. So is there still drive to be better when it comes to real design, to be better when it comes to real taste, to be better when it comes to getting the real Chinese element and get it around? Mirko,
I think
big question for you, but you throw the commercialization to me, I have to throw it back to you.
But you raised a very valid point. It's funny, with my brand Twice, investors often ask us...
No advertisement over here?
Sorry, okay. I think, but the question is, do we want to go abroad? Do we want to be international? To which I always answer, China is big enough. It's just really going to challenge us for a long time. And even more micro, I would say, you can focus on a certain province only and become very strong, very successful, very rich there just by that. And so I think, do you really want to be the big national hero? Do you want to be an international hero? You don't have to. It's all a question of ambition. But I think if you focus, if you look at a niche, if you look at sort of geographic preferences, I think you can do very, very well.
Briefly from you also, Jennifer.
Well, see, I think in the past, consumer spending in China, a lot of the high-end shoppers, there really is a gravitational pull towards Western luxury brands. That's been the pattern before. But with the rise of these new Chinese innovative designers, it's really slowly starting to change that. So, I don't know, I think that for the designers that want to make it big, and everyone wants to make it big, I don't think you get, well, maybe you get into the industry because you really love design, but at the end of the day, you want to be, Versace, or, right? So I think that there is still that drive. I don't care how big the market is. There's always going to be that passion and drive.
I'm sure when Professor Bastian encouraging his students, he's going to say, there is a lot and you need to still explore. Professor Bastian, your final words, briefly.
There's a huge drive, obviously, to be accepted in the fashion world. You've got to make it internationally. Obviously, Milan, the fashion capitals, Milan, Paris, New York and London. You want your work showcased on the catwalks in those fashion shows there. There's huge drive. But I think more than that, younger generations, Chinese generations, I don't really think they see an international divide. They just see it as one big global market now. There really is just, it's not a stepping stone anymore. Older generations probably did. And many Chinese Chinese brands in other areas,
Right.
very, very dominant in China and quite slow to expand internationally. They're trying to do that now, but very,
Okay.
very slow and still quite timid. Haier, for example. But with fashion, young fashion designers, Chinese designers, they don't see it like that. It's just one big global market.
Yes, indeed. Maybe somebody has been talking about deglobalization, but when it comes to fashion, this is really a globalized world that we're talking about here. I want to thank the three of you for coming over to our program during the Spring Festival time. Once again, happy Spring Festival to every one of you. And you look terrific today.
So do you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
新年快乐. Happy
Thank you.
Spring
新年快乐.
Festival. Dr. Mirko Wormuth, Jennifer Hsiung, my co-worker, and also Professor Mike Bastian. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. You're watching World Insights, still to come on our program. A Chinese-American Ivy League professor reported to be one of the richest in the U.S. surfed the wave of digital cloud storage. He shares his story right after the break.
Time to celebrate Chinese New Year. Ooh, making dumplings.
Have some fruits.
The big one.